Hey everyone, it's Saoirse, and today I've brought you into my lounge again to read you another one of my stories. This one is a bit different from the last one. It's a lot darker, and I wrote this one as my first piece for workshop in my master's degree. And I had some fun writing it. I felt inspiration from a particular song, which you will realize soon what that is. And I think that's a great way to write if you're kind of stuck, which I guess I was, being told, here, write 3,000 words and we're all gonna judge you on it soon. It was a little scary, a little intimidating. So I took this song and I ran with it and created something a bit spooky and sad and weird. So why don't we get right into it? This is called Like Night in a Forest. There are only 2 summers in my memory, only 2 that matter. The second summer was dry and brown and crackled with heat, but the year before, during the first summer, it rained every day. It was the kind of rain that keeps most people indoors, even people who don't mind rain. I didn't mind it. Neither did he. He told me it was the reason we lived in the forest. The way the rain sounded splashing through the canopy of leaves, how sometimes we could stand in just the right spot beneath the fullest trees and stay completely dry. Eventually the water broke through. Eventually it fell so steadily and for so long that we couldn't find any more dry patches of earth. All the dirt turned black and the trees swelled. The stream spilled over and the path to our cabin became a river. Everything looked full. I felt full. It wasn't just the rain. He used to tell me that everything about the forest was the reason we lived in the forest. We lived there because of the owls at night, because of the sky full of stars, because of the bears hiding and the deer running and the silence that was never really silent but full of birdsong and rustling leaves. We lived in the forest, so we wouldn't have to die in the city. We met somewhere between the two, at a trailhead just far enough from the cars belching exhaust into the air and the people in their business clothes breathing it in, but not quite in the wilderness. He used to say that a trailhead is a place where anything can begin, not just a path. We began there, at that trailhead. It was spring, 5 years before the summer that brought the rain every day. I was pulling my pack from the back seat of my car. The trunk was still full of boxes, things that had no place because I still had no place. He emerged from the trees as I bent over my pack, rearranging some of my food so that I could reach it during the day. I heard his boots move from grass to gravel and crunch their way closer to me. My hand instinctively reached for the knife at my hip, hovering there, waiting. I didn't look up. "Is that a good one?" he asked. I raised my eyes slowly, moving up from the boots that weren't crunching anymore, to the dirt-stained khaki shorts, to the green flannel shirt, too warm for the weather, and finally to the face beneath a halo of curls and a baseball cap. A soft rain began to fall, making dark spots appear on the brim of his hat. "Is what good?" I asked, standing up straight and brushing my hair out of my eyes. It never stayed in my braids, and as the weeks went by, he took to tucking it behind my ears for me. "The pack," he said, and I could tell he wanted to laugh. The corner of his mouth twitched a bit. "I need an upgrade." He turned slightly, so that I could see the patched and filthy pack on his back. It must have been at least 10 years old. It looked heavy. Too heavy for backpacking in the woods for more than a day. "Are you a masochist?" I asked. This time he did laugh. I didn't want to smile. I hadn't wanted to smile for weeks, but I felt it happening in a way that you'd feel a leg cramp coming on and you know you're powerless to stop it. His eyes were so clear and his smile was so big, and I stopped thinking about the boxes in my car and the apartment I'd grown up in and the apartment I'd felt doomed to die in. I didn't feel doomed for a moment. I felt full. "I guess I'm sentimental," he said, shrugging one shoulder. "I've had this thing since I was a kid." He lifted his arm to adjust his chest strap, and I saw a small patched spot on his left side, where his ribs hid underneath the flannel. I wondered who had patched the shirt for him, or if he'd done it himself. Without my permission, my eyes strayed to his left hand and saw no ring there. It started to rain a bit harder, but neither of us moved. "Oh," I said. "Well, I threw out my old pack and got this one because it weighs less than a pound." He laughed. I didn't know what else to say, but I wanted to hear him speak again. His voice was southern and soft, and it made me want to close my eyes for a while and just breathe the mountain air. I thought he must be a country boy. like the ones my mom used to romanticize in the little apartment we shared, just the two of us. She used to tell me that she should have married a country boy, and the only reason she was glad she met my city-dwelling father was because she had me. But next time, she liked to say, next time she'd marry a country boy. She never did get to marry a country boy, but I did. We met at that trailhead 4 more times by coincidence before he finally asked me if I wanted to join him for a hike. I didn't know if he'd found out I was living in the woods. He never told me. He said he lived in town, but he needed to get out. I wanted to tell him that his town was an anthill next to the volcano that was my city, but I planned to forget the city. I needed to forget the horns honking and the cockroaches that plagued our apartment and the way my mother looked the day I left, like she knew I'd outgrown all of it, like she was afraid I'd outgrown her. I never admitted that I'd been living in my tent. I wasn't ashamed of it. I just didn't need anyone else to know, not even him. That spring when we met, we hiked almost every day together. He used to gently yank on my braids and call me his country girl. I'd like to swat his hand away and laugh and hope for him to do it again. Within a year, we were married. My mom and his family came to our wedding in the woods, and we all danced until the stars and the fireflies twinkled at the same time. My mom held my hands and told me she was happy for me, and I knew she meant it. I knew she'd be okay on her own in the city. I kissed my husband on the nose, on the cheek, on the lips. I was full. The 5 years that passed before the first summer that matters, the one that brought rain every day, passed in a new kind of silence. We made noise, but it was our noise and no one else's. I didn't have to hear horns and shouting and sirens anymore. We sang, we laughed, we ran through the forest until we collapsed into piles of crunchy leaves, and we screamed whenever we realized we were sharing the leaves with snakes. The only other sound was the occasional gunshot during hunting season, but we couldn't help that. He used to sing me this song almost every day. He said it should have been written for me because it was all about me. I was like night in a forest. I was like the mountains in springtime. I was like a walk in the rain. He said I filled up his senses. I told him he filled mine too. We worked hard together. We began a Christmas tree farm and built our cabin nearby. The cabin roof never leaked until the summer when it rained every day. We put a bucket on the floor under the leak, and we made bets on how full it would be by the end of each day. We danced around the bucket until one of us accidentally kicked it and sent the water soaring through the air and splashing the wall, where it dripped onto the floor. Everything was simple, because there was no reason for it to be anything else. The second summer, it didn't rain for weeks. He took to working longer hours on the farm, and I took to walking home before him so I could clean the cabin before he got back. After I cleaned, I walked in the forest until it was dark. I started entering the cabin through the back door. I started walking everywhere barefoot because my footsteps seemed so loud. The silence felt deafening in the absence of rain. He caught me sleeping, curled up in the closet a few times, and he laughed. I must have done it again just to hear him laugh. I didn't know why else I was doing it. Many nights during the dry summer, I crept into the cabin and lay in his arms, listened to him say I was like night in a forest, and fell asleep with his breath on my hair. I slipped away and back into the woods before morning light. I walked to the farm, walked home early, cleaned, wandered in the forest, and entered the cabin barefoot after dark. Always through the back door. Every night. I didn't feel full anymore. We stopped dancing. We couldn't. It was too loud to hear the music. He still tucked my hair behind my ears. He still tried to sing that song to me, but I told him we had to be quiet. His voice was so soft before. At night, I couldn't even stand to hear it anymore. We couldn't make noise, especially not in the dark. We had to stay quiet. I needed to keep everything clean, and he needed to be silent. There was no more rain to wash everything away, no more rain to cover all the noise with a soft and constant patter against the windows. I fixed the leak, but it didn't matter. The rain didn't come. One day I walked home and started to clean just like always. I was sweating. The rain still hadn't come, but the air was thick and heavy with it, like the sky needed to burst. I tucked my hair behind my own ears this time, the strands sticking to my face and neck, sweat beading on my chest and back. I thought I should open a window, but what if I forgot to close it? Someone would notice. I tried to breathe evenly, but there just wasn't any air. I kept cleaning. The clock was just ticking over to 3 when I heard the sound that gave me back my smile. A thunderclap shattered the roaring silence of the past few weeks. The rain would reach the leaves before it reached the cabin, before it reached me. I dropped the cloth I'd been using to wipe the coffee table. I picked it up, dropped it again, and laughed. I couldn't remember the last time I'd allowed myself to laugh, to make that much noise. But it wasn't nighttime yet. I was safe. I could laugh all I wanted. I reached for the cloth again and danced over to the fireplace, picked up the picture frame placed right in the middle, began to wipe the mantle beneath it, and stopped. I was holding a picture of two strangers. But that couldn't be right. It had always been a picture of my husband and I. The smell of the rain crept through the crack under the back door, the way I'd crept through the back door for weeks. The smell always came before the sound of the drops on the roof. One drop, then two, then thousands, just like that, and just like that I allowed myself to remember. I dropped the frame and the glass shattered into pieces all over the floor, some pieces smaller than a grain of rice. I walked barefoot across the glass, barely feeling the shards pressing into my flesh, slicing it open as I reached the window and looked out. I felt empty. I knew I wasn't waiting for him to come home. Of course I knew. I'd always known he wasn't just working longer hours. He was never coming home. They took him from me, the strangers in the picture. I shut my eyes tight and willed myself to look back at that day near the end of the rainy summer. Whether I knew it or not, I'd been trying to see that day again for nearly a year. I just couldn't do it without the rain. I kept my eyes shut. I listened to the rain, and I remembered. It had been the beginning of September. The air was wet and sticky, and the rain didn't stop for more than a few minutes at a time. It was early in the morning. That part was clear. The sun was rising through the trees, and the way it shone through the wet air made the forest sparkle like stained glass. Spots of light dappled the ground. We held the picnic basket between us, swinging it back and forth. We were heading to the tarp we'd hung by the stream so we could have picnics in the rain without the bread getting too soggy. We were barefoot. The mud squished between my toes. He pulled on my braid with his free hand. Then he was on the ground, and the basket had burst open and the grapes were bouncing away and the sandwiches landed flat in the mud, and I knew I should grab them before they got any worse, but he wasn't moving. I dropped to my knees and put my hands on top of his. He was on his back, holding that spot on his ribs, the one that had been covered by the patch on his flannel shirt the day we met. I'd kissed that spot every day for years. He was holding it and he wouldn't let go. I heard a sharp crack, a stick breaking under a boot. My head snapped up, and for a single moment I saw a man and woman in the distance carrying rifles, turning to run. Their pale faces turned too quickly, but I'd seen them. I wouldn't forget them. I looked back at my husband, and his eyes were rolling back and his hands weren't clutching his ribs anymore. I looked for the spot I always kissed, but it wasn't there anymore. It was in pieces. I couldn't kneel anymore. I couldn't see anymore. I stood up and ran. I knew I couldn't catch them, but I ran anyway. The stones and roots stabbing at my bare feet, cutting them, making me run faster so I wouldn't feel the pain just yet. I could feel something like a sob caught in my chest, aching, but it came out like a whimper, the kind wolves make when they've been dominated and know it's all over. I ran until I reached the road and saw their car driving away, tires screeching, mud churning up and splashing their license plate, the rain falling harder. A month later, when my husband was nothing but a jar of ashes in my pack, weighing it down more than ever, I stood in the forest and watched the realtor I'd hired to sell the cabin. I watched her welcome couple after couple, all of them looking to escape the city. I didn't want to talk to them. I didn't want to be in that place we'd built together. I stayed in the shadows, and then I saw them. I knew their faces right away. They'd returned, come so close to the scene of the crime that their audacity almost made me laugh. But I stayed silent. They made an offer on the cabin. They didn't know who owned it. It was the lowest offer I got, but I told the realtor I'd sell it to no one else. I stayed away as long as I could. I let them have the winter, and they put up a Christmas tree from our farm. I let them have the spring, and everything in the forest exploded with color. But when summer came and it didn't rain, I went back. I entered the cabin through the back door every day while they were working. I cleaned their filth from our home. They always came in together at 6 o'clock. I'd always be in the forest, waiting for them to go to sleep. I slept in the closet in the second bedroom. I knew my husband would laugh if he saw me there, I knew he'd try to sing to me, but he couldn't. Everything had to be quiet or they'd know. I dreamed of him every night, of his breath on my hair and his words in my ear. I let myself get lost in my new life, the one I lived in the dark, where I could imagine he was still with me. I forgot about the couple sleeping in the next room. I cleaned, walked in the forest, and slept. I just wanted to feel full again. I opened my eyes and knew I'd been standing by the window for too long. I felt the shards of glass embedded in the soles of my feet, blood congealing between my toes. I thought of the way the mud squished between my toes on the day he died. I heard a car door slam. I heard their voices. She was laughing. How could she be laughing? How could she laugh ever again after what happened? I didn't know which one of them had fired the shot. I didn't know which one of them was stupid enough to mistake my husband, my world, for a deer, but it didn't matter to me. I walked back over the broken glass and into the kitchen. I opened the drawer next to the stove where we used to cook dinner together every night. I grabbed the knife, the one the strangers had bought in the city. I thought of that spot, just beneath their arms, between their ribs. I walked to the front door, pushing the glass deeper and deeper into my feet. I stood behind the door and I waited. It was still raining, enough to wash away the mess all over my body. I stepped outside and lifted my hands to the sky, letting the blood run from my fingertips and down my arms, from my forehead into my mouth. I smiled. It was dark now, but I felt the moon shining on my skin, shining through the rain. He always told me that the rain was the reason we lived in the forest. It was dark, but I knew I'd be able to see now. Night in the forest was never too dark for me. I opened my eyes, and through the thickly falling rain I could see him waiting there beside the stream. I felt full. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that wasn't too creepy. I thought it was funny that was the first story that I wrote for workshop, because it was like, here, form your impression of me based on this awful, creepy tale. But yes, the song, oh my god, my voice. The song that I was inspired by is Annie's Song by John Denver. You fill up my senses, you know, that one. Go listen to it. Once I wrote this story, I could never listen to it the same way. It's beautiful, but now it's like, ugh. So, thank you for listening, and let me know your thoughts. As usual, if you have anything mean to say, probably not gonna approve it because we don't need negativity around here. I really appreciate everybody's very constructive feedback on my last story. That was so good to read. To everybody who commented, thank you. It feels like you're shouting into a void when you write. You're just by yourself at your desk, tapping away and not knowing if anybody's ever going to hear this or if it's going to resonate with anyone or entertain anyone. And so to hear you guys telling me what you thought and what resonated with you is really, really special. So thank you very, very much. And until I see you next time, happy reading and happy Pride.